So hello and welcome. You're listening to The Next Page, the podcast of the Librarian Archives dedicated to advancing the conversation on multilateralism. And today we have an exciting episode. We're going to be exploring the frontier of anticipatory science diplomacy. We're very excited to have with us online today Professor Marilyne Andersen, who is Director General at GESDA, the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator. So welcome, Professor Andersen. Thank you for joining us. But first of all, what is GESDA exactly, and what does it mean in practice to anticipate emerging scientific breakthroughs and translate them into benefits for society?
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to have the discussion. So in a nutshell, GESDA is an entity, a foundation that aims to first anticipate what will be the next advances in science or technology, the next discoveries, and then do something about it. Prepare for the disruptions that these will create and the transformational aspects that it will have on society. And as these are quite deep, it makes sense to know them in advance and then take advantage of the space we have between now and then, when they will be there, to prepare. So the whole foundation is about that, and how to prepare and how to identify these breakthroughs is, of course, what GESDA does as well.
Very interesting. I think there was a really active word used there, which was do. And I believe you have described GESDA as both a think tank and a do tank. But I am interested in knowing, when we're looking at these scientific advances at maybe 5, 10, 25 years horizon, how do we build that concretely into diplomatic work now? You've outlined, I think we can start to understand why that's important, but what needs to change? And can you give us a sort of concrete example about how you would do that?
Yeah, so maybe first it's interesting to go deeper into how GESDA does both the anticipation and then the action. So how we try to anticipate these scientific discoveries is by working directly with scientists all over the world. We have a community of about 2,300 scientists right now globally. And with them, we work human to human through workshops and discussions as to what they imagine the next phases of development will be in 5, 10, 25 years into the future. So to sort of gather their intelligence, their knowledge directly from their brain. So this is very different from doing foresight that would be based on data that you find on the internet or documents that you can mine, because these would already be written and also would be influenced by the hype, like what is most talked about. Whereas we go directly to the imagination, let's say, of these scientists and sort of invite them to think in the future with their brain, even though they may not have thought in those terms so far. So this is how we do the anticipation work. Now then, how do we prepare? I just said we should prepare, but how and with whom? So the sphere, the sector we want to engage primarily with is the diplomatic sector, diplomacy. So basically governing bodies, but also those who work on policies and so on, and will shape in a way how this will be handled. Those that are also shapers is the industry, the business sector. And they also, or maybe mostly in terms of actual impact into the like transformative impact into the society, is another sphere that we have to work with, and of course also the civil society. So this brings us to altogether 4 communities we directly interact with: the scientists, the diplomacy sector, the industry and business, and civil society. Now, more concretely, this translates into either a support to policy making or a support to conversations happening in the diplomacy sphere. And concrete examples of those are our work that we did when the Human Rights Council started to work on the ethical aspects of neurotechnology, and this being also a new emerging field, GESDA had a role to play, or our collaboration on the UN Pact for the Future, which was again something that was really about something coming up, emerging technologies notably, and digitalization, and therefore that that was a useful contribution. Now, even more concretely, I would cite the Open Quantum Institute. So for this is a project that was incubated and sort of initiated at GESDA, starting from the collection of what we see will be coming in terms of emerging science, which is collected into what we call the radar, the GESDA Science Breakthrough Radar. This is open to anyone to read and does give these 5, 10, 25 years possible futures based on the scientists' voices. In 2021, there were, of course, many things to discuss, but one interesting point was that even though AI was already quite active, even at the time, and not yet in the population, but in experts, certainly it was, the quantum computing in particular was maybe, if I can do a play of words, a bit under the radar at the time. And also its development were seen, like having actual quantum computers was seen then in, let's say, 8, 9 years, something along those lines, a little less than 10 years. So that was a good window of opportunity to start working on it. And how we work on it is to ask the real questions. Who will this change something significant for? What are the questions that are asked? Which domains might it touch? And what came up quite quickly was that the quantum discussions were mostly in the military sector. So what about thinking about other fields? And there was clearly going to be a question of access to it. So inclusivity and sort of equitability. And these led GESDA to start thinking along the lines of the Sustainable Development Goals as a sort of a red thread, and to bring together all the communities that I was mentioning before. The scientists who are expert in quantum, the business who are developing quantum, the diplomats who are interested in engaging in this question, and of course the broader civil society, and to work with international organizations like focusing on agriculture or food and UNESCO and different businesses, including Microsoft and others, to look more deeply into it. And what the Open Quantum Institute became, which is now hosted at CERN and is supported by UBS, so the private sector as well, is to have this drive to quantum for all, so really this access aspect, and to make sure to test governance models that we might imagine. So how do we bring the different stakeholders around the table? What frameworks should we put in place? What partnerships should exist to be ready for when quantum will be there, and to try to test that in different places in the world where this might be useful. So first of all, what questions could it solve? What real world questions could it solve? Water leak detection, pancreatic cancer, early detection, food delivery, many questions come up that quantum could help to solve. But it takes time to form these frameworks, form these partnerships, think about these questions, think about which actors should be brought together. And this time we have, when we are not at the moment where the discovery is out there yet, it's still a few years away from today, seemingly, the quantum computing and the work that was done so far with the Open Quantum Institute with CERN has been paving the way to address the questions that I just mentioned of access and what questions it might solve.
Of course, it's quite hard to think in these timescales for many of us, and particularly, I think, policymakers and so on, who have to be in the immediate and with populations who want to see quite sudden results and changes to their own lives. I was wondering, you're bringing together so many different communities to talk about these issues, and I'm wondering, there's such different mindsets and approaches to things. I was wondering how you build a sort of shared language amongst these different groups of people that are around the table in GESDA. I think you hinted at it slightly with your way of saying, what are the questions? You know, you're framing these discussions. And I'm wondering if that is the way that you bring people together for these discussions, or is there more to it? What do we need as skills to develop?
Yes, that's a great question. I would say maybe we act on two fronts. On the one hand, indeed, it is about bringing people together and start to understand each other's language and way of thinking. Scientists think in a very different way than diplomats, who think in a very different way than business people. And these are all interesting ways to think. Scientists will want precision. They are very straightforward. They want to it's very evidence-based, so it is also precise in the sense that it is quite specific and maybe lacking sometimes implications that would be much broader and way beyond the field. Diplomats might think more holistically, making connections, but also will be driven by finding a consensus. So this might be a less straightforward approach. And then, of course, business has other imperatives and incentives, and will look for efficiency and obviously return on investment. This is the point. And also will thrive to innovation that gets them somewhere. So these are very interesting and different mindsets. So when we are embarked on the same bigger question, is a very nice forum to convene and start to converge and see how enriching it is to think differently. But another mindset building is necessary, which is more the anticipatory mindset. Like you were saying before, it is hard to think in those terms in this 5, 10, 25 years. What does this mean? Also, we think linearly, of course, and therefore developments that have an exponential growth, like we see now with AI, are very hard to grasp for us. So on the other hand, we also actually have very dedicated efforts to bring people to acquire that anticipatory mindset, especially decision makers. And this is done through different formats of engagement or training that we offer and deliver, both in Geneva. Actually, on an annual basis, we have what we call the Science Diplomacy Week, which is a way to bring people over 5 days in different places, emblematic places in Geneva, on science and diplomacy, to, first of all, think about, okay, the science of today versus the science of tomorrow. How do we tackle this in policy making or policy thinking? What forces are playing a role when a consensus needs to be found, and what could be conflicting goals versus common goals. So all of this is part of that sort of training. And we have, since 2025, started to deliver it also in different places in the world, where we can not only see how to adapt it to different audiences, business, students, diplomats, scientists, but also how to adapt it, of course, to different contexts, different economies, different places that have mindsets or preoccupations that are also very different. So we had a pilot edition in each of the 5 continents, and we will continue to do these in different parts of the world, to also confront ourselves, but also enrich this training to different types of reception of this training, and partner with universities who will then take it over. And so the idea is to have a multiplying effect. So I would say the learning is on these 2 fronts, if we can summarize it in that way, both the acquiring an anticipatory mindset in decision making. Decisions can be policy making, but can also be investment decisions. And having the opportunity to have a table, virtual or physical, around which different mindsets with different preoccupations, but all interested in an overarching question or future discovery and its implications, gathered to discuss and put the real questions on the table, the ethical questions, the access questions, all of these questions pertaining to who we are as humans, how we interact with our planet, and how we work and live together.
There's a massive amount of learning, and also both ways, because it's also learning how to do this and do this well across the world. Wouter.
Yeah, you already mentioned the importance of inclusivity and access to information. This is what we call open science, which is the open access to scientific output, data and publications. Why is this so important for you, and why should it be important for all of us?
I hope it's obvious why it should be important to all of us that we have equitable access and or work towards that. It's not an easy goal to reach, but it is one that we should aim for. So the anticipation and the open science are maybe complementary sort of angles to this the question of how science can be accessible to all. Open access in science obviously means that we should not, or we should remove as much as possible the obstacles to getting access to the knowledge. And so this is a right to science, and to satisfy the human right to science, which is even written as a human right. Open science and open access in publications, for instance, are a very evident and an important tool. It does not solve everything, because right now anyway, and this is, I'm talking about the academic sector, it is still costly to allow your publications to be open access. So it allows you to have a platform that is broader, but you have to pay for it. So it is still inequitable in the sense that only those who can afford to pay the extra bit to be open can then be read, which means that it's the wealthier who will be read. And on the other hand, it's still better, because at least then those who would not be able to afford reading, now it is free. The anticipation in that regard is maybe aligned in that mindset, in the sense that we want to take the time, and time is of essence in this regard. Take the time while we have it, while there is no competition, no race, no immediate money involved, to think about how to make it accessible. How can it be relevant for regions of the world or populations that might not be developing the particular technology that we are talking about? And so it is very much aligned with this open science in the sense of accessible science, access to science, access for all. And actually the Open Quantum Institute that I was mentioning before, the initiative is actually called Quantum for All. So it really embeds that access into it. And so, yes, it is. Both, of course, have their shortcomings, but the two together, trying to make sure as much as possible that future discoveries will not be reserved to those who develop them and who are the only ones who profit of them, is one angle, the anticipatory angle. And the open science in general, with open publications and science being just accessible, is another. And at GESDA, we make sure that what we produce, the radar in particular that I was mentioning before, this collection of 5, 10, 25 years possible futures, is accessible to all, in the sense that it's on the internet and web, and so anyone can read it. Of course, you have to brace yourself to get into it and dive into scientific language. The point is to keep the language scientific in that, and then to do the translation work on top.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, access to data and publications is really important. It's a human right. But also, the fact that some people may actually be able to use these data is something that could also create more gaps, because there are, technology is advancing very fast. The amount of data is available is increasing very fast. How do we make sure through open science and anticipatory science that those data actually become available and usable for all of us? And so how can we invest in skills training, for example, to make this happen?
Yes, it's of course a very important question, also pertaining to the dual use of a lot of these, of any technological advance will have a dual use, from the most mundane hammer to the most complex nuclear reactor. So it's a question of responsibility and ethics. And I would say that the academic world, the scientific world, is a good lab, pun intended, for these ethical questions to be tackled. Like doing experiments, you have to go through an ethical commission approval, you have to get consent, you have to be transparent, even though you don't disclose the purpose of the experiment usually, otherwise it creates a bias that you don't want. So there is a framework. So it is all about what information you decide to make public or not. So if I go back to our radar, the radar speaks about what might be coming in the future in terms of discoveries. There is no recipe to create anything harmful or positive, but it is about these. So in this sense, it seems responsible to disclose it. Of course, we are in the middle of questions of AI being ubiquitous and having access to everything and making it very easy to build or develop many things, weapons, harmful things. So it's a delicate question that is not solved by science anticipation per se. It is a responsibility that we all have in whatever information we decide to make public or to disclose, or in what frame we decide to share any kind of information. And this is something that humanity has to tackle.
And what role do you see for libraries, archives, and other institutions that sustain open, trustworthy, and interoperable knowledge ecosystems?
So it would be wonderful if they remained the beacon of trust and the safe space in which we have this curation. I put the conditional tense here because even in academia, which is supposed to stay the beacon of knowledge and where you learn and where we decide what makes sense to learn and all that, the current period we are living in, especially, of course, with the rise of AI, is questioning, or social media in general, or just the digitalization of our world, is raising the question of where these repositories and this trustful shell will stay, because it is becoming, in a way, decentralized, or like it's a bit everywhere, which is great for artists to be able to get a platform and to become known without having to go through all the gatekeeping obstacles that would be happening in the past. So this is wonderful. And at the same time, you then have a mixture of truth and lies and fake news and whatnot. And therefore, you want to keep institutions and to trust in them. But of course, there is currently also some level of erosion of a trust in institutions too, and that we have to account for and then adapt to.
Since we're talking about academia, if you don't mind, Marilyne, I was just so fascinated by your own journey. And you're a physicist and a leading expert also on daylight, which brings in neuroscience and psychophysics, really at this intersection of science and engineering, but also design and society and culture. And I was really wondering if you would tell us what brought you then to global governance and diplomacy.
Well, as everything in life is made of opportunities you decide to seize or not, paths you decide to explore or not. And I didn't necessarily draw the academic path for myself either. But it was a series of opportunities, deciding to do a PhD rather than writing comic books, to get love for science in the young. This was something that I thought I would do. And then after the PhD, becoming a professor, first at MIT, which then brought me to meet colleagues at the Harvard Medical School and therefore start to work in health rather than in optics. And then coming back, continuing on that aspect, and then through other opportunities, starting to engage with art as a channel to engage in science through emotion rather than explanation. And so the GESDA opportunity was in that series of opportunities that come and go. But I would say that in my own thinking and what I love to do is to connect things. So this I discovered about myself. And as a physicist, it's a very good basis to become a connector, because it helps you to structure how you think and how you see problems, or not problems in the negative sense, but problems to solve, let's say. And that means you're quite versatile in where you go then. And I discovered in myself a thirst for making connections between things, making a connection between light as a radiation with energy, sustainability, and humans, and then got more into health and the science and diplomacy world is exactly that, is trying to connect even further maybe than what I did by connecting between fields or connecting to art, is to really connecting worlds together and then work on a more global scale. So it was coincidence, chance, whatever. I'm probably very lucky, but it's also this interest in having an open mind and in trying and be curious about what things mean for one another, and then and going on that journey.
Yes, it's wonderful, this openness to ideas. And it's so human-centric as well. And so you've mentioned art several times, and I think you have done some initiatives bridging art and science with the Smart Living Lab. I was wondering if that influences also the way in which you see bringing together these different communities at GESDA and the ability to engage with these different communities, with this ability to connect and translate and, share these ideas perhaps in different languages and different ways.
Absolutely. I mean, the Smart Living Lab was more of a research center connecting between human sciences, social sciences, and engineering and sort of energy and building engineering. So the art part was probably not prevalent, but to get started on the Smart Living Lab journey, I launched a collaboration project across different schools, including an art and design school, to work on the communication aspects on a solar house competition that was in the US, which we happen to have won. But on the art front, it is very relevant for GESDA. And in fact, it's a very interesting coincidence. The very first and only actually exhibition that I co-curated, properly art and science exhibition that I co-curated, was with Professor Sarah Kenderdine from EPFL, who leads the experimental museology lab. And it is with her that GESDA, absolutely not connected to me at the time, started to work on public portal to anticipation to engage the citizens, the general public, into the work of GESDA, into the work of anticipation or science anticipation. So it's an art piece, an immersive piece where you engage into possible futures on a personal level. And it's always also the exhibition that we co-curated, in which I had a piece myself, which was immersive but very physical, to experience a day as a meditative experience with imagery and sound and whatnot. So that is what I did for Light. But for GESDA, this portal, the public portal to anticipation, the idea is to choose which kind of futures you want to explore, at what time, in what time frame, on what subjects, with what emotion, and then pops up a story, a utopia in which you can relate to, because it also talks about your own country or things that you chose, and it makes it more tangible what might a future where these discoveries will have happened look like. So it's not meant to be a description or precise or any prediction of the future, but more to invite you to get into a world that has changed due to a discovery, to make you aware that it is relevant for you as a person to also care about these aspects and to also engage in these conversations. And the power of art is very strong in that regard, is you can lecture people about, in my case, light and circadian rhythms and all of these. But it's different when they go to an exhibition and they enter, let's say, in my own immersive piece, and they experience 7 minutes in this environment, visual, acoustic, and they come out of the whole exhibition saying, so light is really important. And this is what you want, is to this awareness that you should care. And then you might change your habit or not. You might look at light or daylight in particular differently. And this is better for you. So this is great, and might happen more deeply or more sustainably, in the sense of for a longer time, than if they had been to one of my amazing lecture but didn't remember much after a couple of months. So it's a very powerful channel. The fact of drawing from your emotions and being there at the personal level.
Oh, this has so many possibilities. I feel so excited by that. And I hope that so many people can experience that too, and maybe see some of these exhibitions, immersive experiences and so on. How wonderful.
They will. The idea is to bring that portal, which was displayed for the first time or revealed at World Expo in Osaka in Japan for 6 months last year. So it was there for all the visitors, but of course, more than 80% of the visitors were Japanese. So the Japanese population had a real opportunity to engage in that, but we are bringing it back to Switzerland. It went to Hong Kong for a little while, and in Switzerland will be the first big Swiss reveal in Geneva. So hopefully you will be able to also experience it.
I certainly will.
That'd be amazing, yeah. So this work at the intersection of science, diplomacy, and art. You also mentioned in the beginning the importance of training and the trainings that you've been organizing all over the world. From your experience, what helps scientists become better at engaging with policy processes, and what helps diplomats feel more at ease engaging with science?
As many things that are very human, it's to have the opportunity to spend some time together. This is the key, is you get enriched by seeing how interesting and complementary it is to talk to someone who doesn't start with the same basis as yourself. And this is true as a student. It was true when the solo decathlon competition that I mentioned, having architects and engineers talk to one another to come up with a house. You need to find in the other what you're missing. And so for scientists and diplomats, they come with very strong assets and competences, but not the same. And therefore, to have a common goal, like one of these overarching questions, what should we do about neurotechnology and brain-computer interfaces emerging? What should we do about synthetic biology starting to affect or possibly positively affecting our ecosystems? What should we do when quantum and AI will converge? So what should we do is of importance to all of these communities who start from a different angle, but having these conversations and listening. So it's listening and not only talking are both keys to having a collaborative project that ultimately gets where nobody could go alone. So it's ultimately it's a very human endeavor to listen, to contribute, to be humble, and to be curious. And in the end, the magic happens even in these training frameworks where we have a mix of people and they learn from one another, even without an overarching question to solve immediately, but in this journey to get or acquire a new mindset.
What does that mean for young people in terms of skills and mindset?
So the young people are our biggest assets. They will be the deciders of tomorrow and they will shape the world. So for me, the big questions that we have to ask ourselves about the really young generation is, in an era where these emerging science advances are becoming a reality or will be a reality, like the companionship between biological humans and artificial intelligence, what makes sense to learn? What skills are important to acquire to stay not only relevant, but to be able to have the upper hand, which is not easy because these are more intelligent than us. So somehow we have to keep the upper hand in the sense of benefiting from that companionship and not being surpassed by it. And this applies, of course, to other fields as well. It's probably more obvious with AI. So I think we have to allow ourselves to be bold in asking questions of what should be education tomorrow? How should research evolve tomorrow? So even in the pure academic field, which tends to be quite conservative, even though that's where the discoveries emerge from, we have to ask these bold questions, which are disruptive also organizationally and structurally, to make sure that the younger generations, and us too, but we are old already, are equipped to adapt, to be agile, to be inventive, to know what it means to struggle and go beyond the immediate obstacles, and outsourcing all of what we do or most of what we do to an alien entity is something that can have a danger, a risk associated to it, because it might mean that our brains will evolve differently and therefore, or sort of build themselves differently over the years, and might be less equipped to be the human inventors of tomorrow. So these are part of my concerns, but they are a very important and voice to listen to carefully, because they oftentimes also have this boldness of not being anchored in something that they are used to doing, but also have fresh minds, and this is something that is especially precious today.
Absolutely. So to conclude, Marilyne, I've had so much fun with GESDA's radar, and you've talked about it about 3 times already. I would like to encourage this boldness and openness and curiosity amongst our listeners, and for them to go and have a look at this. But would you tell us a little bit more clearly what exactly it is, and what's your personal favorite at the moment, maybe, to dip into?
The favorite will be tough, but I can already tell you what you can find in there. So it is text. So it's qualitative information that is representing the voice of scientists about what will come in 5, 10, 25 years in different domains of science or technology. The radar is structured in around 40 or so topics in which we go deeper, and which range from linguistics, philosophy, economics to mathematics. So these are the more maybe surprising aspects, but also, of course, to cognition and human enhancement or longevity, to the orbital space, the quantum and advanced AI, so the future of AI, pathogen biology and synthetic biology in general, so linking to pandemics and vaccines. So it has a huge variety of topics that you can dive deeper into, and where you can get a sense of what scientists think might happen in a certain number of years. And then as a person, you can decide which one you resonate personally most to, which one you want to go deeper into, and which ones the title is sufficient and you don't want to go any further. And then, of course, to then on your own will to dive deeper into that subject of what is the status today. So there is no end in inquiry. So it's really, it's hard to read from the one cover to the other cover. It is also a physical book of 350 pages that is 1.6 kilograms heavy. So you can use it as a bedside book, but it is probably more expected from people to engage in it on a more spontaneous level in topics that they're interested in. But it is very broad in scope, but very deep and specific in those particular areas that it chose to focus on, where we did what we call a deep dive.
So we're going to put that in the notes, the link, so that you can go and explore all sorts of fascinating topics. Marilyne Andersen, thank you very, very much for joining us today.
With pleasure. Thank you.